Hey everybody, it's Saturday night and we're going to take a trip around the world. It's been a while and I got a lot done this week, so this is probably going to be a busy around the world. I can say as far as my 29-gallon miscellaneous tank goes, not a lot, but I did do a water change. I actually did 2 water changes on this tank this week. I've been kind of busy down here the last couple of days. Every tank in the room has had a water change either today or yesterday, with the exception of my quarantine tank, and we'll get to that when we get to it. But this tank, I didn't bother to wipe the glass down or anything. I was just banging out water change after water change, and I am going to be probably getting another rubber lip pleco for this tank, or possibly a clown pleco or something like that. I'm pretty sure the one in here must have died. I haven't seen it in a long time, and you can see how the glass is getting dirty and the plants are getting covered with stuff again. If there was a rubber lip in this tank, it would be very clean. They just stay on top of keeping tanks clean. So I've been tinkering with my water as far as adding calcium and additives, and I think that might be key to helping these rubber lips stay alive. I don't really have good success with them, and so if that's the case, then we should be able to do well with getting some fish in this tank. So we'll deal with that a little bit down the road. Otherwise, nothing really going on in this tank. My Grammie Tank here, big fat water change. I did remove a bunch of the water sprite in there, a bunch of this floating water sprite. I've got a bucket of this stuff, actually. If anybody's interested in any and wants to buy some water sprite, let me know. Like I said, I've got a bucket. If you're anywhere within, mailing distance, continental United States, I can throw a handful of them in a Ziploc and get them sent off to you. So I'll put my email below. If you're interested, you can contact me. I've pretty much always got it, so even if you're seeing this video down the road a piece, then, just hit me up. I've probably got some kind of extra Java fern or something in there that I can get rid of. Right now, like I said, I've got a bucket full of stuff. It's a little bit of everything in there. But other than that, nothing really going on in here. I haven't done anything as far as experimenting with the water on this tank. I removed a few leaves from the red tiger lotus and, plucked a few fronds from the Java fern in there that were looking a little rough. But other than that, nothing really happening in this tank. I haven't lost any fish, haven't added any fish or anything else. So we'll move right along to my T-bar tank. My T-bar tank, I want to say right now, while we can see it, although I think it just, I think we just missed it, or I just missed it. I was pointing the camera at the screen. Maybe we got to see if a little bubble just rose up off of the flower in there. I've been watching over the last several days bubbles accumulating on the flowers and then rising up. I shot a video yesterday about the little bit of pearling I'm getting. I know it's not a lot, but it is a little bit of pearling. See, there's another bubble. It just came right off of the leaf right there. Off of the flower. So that's pretty interesting. It's obviously only coming off of the flowers. I'm not seeing any kind of bubbles accumulating on any of the leaves, but it is, readily accumulating and bubbling off of the flowers, and that's oxygen coming out of there. So that's pretty neat. That's pretty exciting as far as I'm concerned. I'm looking around now, and I'm not seeing any bubbles on the tips of any leaves anywhere, anything like that. But I did put a new LED on this tank recently, and I wondered whether or not I was going to get good vigorous growth from the plants, and I sure enough am. I've also put a bunch of mineral stones in the bottom of the tank. I kind of tucked them away here and there behind various clumps of plants so you can't see them. You can kind of tell the bottom looks a little grayer than normal, or at least it looks a little grayer than normal to me, who sees it every day. That's just the sediment and the dust that kind of settled down from when I put the mineral stones in there. That'll go away over time, and the gravel will look a lot more black. And then the mineral stones, let's see if we can see a few of them. See those really light gray stones right there? Those are the mineral stones, and I've got a few little small handfuls of them tucked away in various corners of the tank, like I said. So hopefully that will increase my mineral content, and the snails that are in this tank will be able to grow good healthy shells, and then of course all of the positive mineral ions in the tank ought to be good for the fish as well. So other than that, not a lot going on. Like I said, big water change, wiped the glass down, new LED, plants are growing great, added mineral stones, and we're moving on. My Black Ghost Knifefish tank, I finally got in here and did a little bit of remodeling. I was doing a water change yesterday, and I was picking some of the dead leaves or some of the yellowing, dying leaves off of some of the plants in there. And I decided I was going to finally lift up the cave here that my Black Ghost knife fish lives under. And when I lifted it up, if you can see that rock in the back, that white rock that's sticking out, that was tucked in underneath of this rock, and then this white rock here was lying on its side, so it was very flat. And when I lifted it up, there was a space on the inside that was around, I mean, it was like the shape of the Black Ghost Knifefish's head, and he was lying in there like this with his tail going back underneath of there, and it looked like he grew to fit the space under the rock. It was really strange looking the way he laid in there, like it was made for him. It was like a coffin or something. And it looked so cramped that I decided that I gotta open that cave up a little bit. So I moved it around. I didn't do a ton of work or anything. I just moved the rock that was under there. And then, you can kind of see back there how I sort of propped it up on its side and moved it out from inside the cave, so it now creates sort of a wall rather than occupying the inside space. And then this white rock here up front, of course, I turned upright, and now it's lifted the whole roof rock, we'll call it, up higher. And immediately the Black Ghost Knifefish left and is now spending its time in this cave over here, sort of lying flat on its side in the bottom there. I'm just assuming they like really tight spaces where they feel safe and secure, and I just went and wrecked his little house. So I feel kind of bad about it, but I'll get over it. I'm not going to lose too much sleep over it. I also want to point out my little Anubias over here. As far as I know, this is not any kind of dwarf species of Anubias. It's just never really grown large in this tank, but it's always been doing well. This little bundle of Anubias there is about 5 years old now. And then you can see all of that fresh new root growth and that rhizome growth right off the front there. That's looking fantastic. And then I'm also getting some of the, I always want to call it Val. I don't know, it's not Val. I can never remember what it is. That's actually growing up out of the woodwork back there. Like the roots have grown down into the wood, and that's actually rooted into the wood, so that's pretty neat. And this plant seems to come and go. I don't know what it is, and I don't know how it got in my tank. Somebody's identified it for me before, but it's a really weird looking, spongy looking plant growing right on the tip of that piece of wood, and that has come back and is looking really amazing. I had it in there for a while, and then when the tank got really overrun with all of the nasty green growth and everything, it sort of died off. But now that I got the tank cleaned up, it's back. And again, I don't know what kind of plant that is, but it's really neat looking. And I think I've got it growing in a couple spots. I think it's actually, yeah, there's a big patch of it right there too. So I'm not really sure what that is, but it's an interesting looking plant, and it's been in the tank forever. I don't ever remember buying it or putting it in the tank or whatever, but there it is. And then that's another little patch of, believe it or not, Anubias that has been in the tank for about 5 years and is just still kind of hanging on and struggling on. I tied it on there when I first set the tank up, and it's still there, and it's still living. You can see bright new green growth on it. Another tiny little Anubias that is likewise as old as the tank. I put that in there when I set the tank up about 5 years ago. All the plants in here for the most part. A few of these temple plants, this little temple plant here, and then there's a temple plant in the back underneath the power head. Both of them went in a little more recently, maybe a few years ago, but all the other plants in this tank have been in there for the duration. They've been in there for about 5 years now. So I got some tiny little Anubias that is 5 years old in that tank. So moving on. My native tank. 2 big fat water changes over the last 4 or 5 days. I've really brought the tannins and the nitrates and everything way down. I've not seen any crayfish in the last several days. I did see a dead one about a week ago, so I think we're out of crayfish, or they've gone back to hiding or something. I haven't seen any of them. But this is the tank where I'm doing the most experimenting with the water chemistry. I started by putting a bunch of crushed up eggshells, just regular old hen eggs from our breakfast. I washed them and then just ground them up as fine as I could do it with my fingers and sprinkled it in the tank, and they're so fine, in fact, that they've made their way down through the substrate and you can't even see them in there anymore. The idea was to add some calcium. I then added some mineral stones to the tank, the same ones I talked about adding to the other tank, and they have not shifted my pH, or nothing's really changed in this tank so far. And then today I did something else, and I added a third thing directly into the canister filter. When I did a water change, I changed the filter out, and I put something in there. We'll talk about that in a different video. I don't want to give it away on this one just yet, because it's not a product that's designed for aquariums. It's designed for something else, but I think it's going to suit my purposes, and I'm hoping it won't mess with my water hardness or my pH. Honestly, if it brings my water hardness up just a little bit, that's fine. I'm sitting right at 0. If I bring it up to 3, that's fine. I don't mind 3 degrees water hardness. I don't mind 5 degrees water hardness. I don't want to slam it up there, but if it gets up there gradually, having very soft water at 3, 4, 5 degrees hardness is fine. I'm at 0 right now, so putting a little bit of minerals into the water isn't going to come amiss. Otherwise, not a lot going on. I did change the lighting over on this tank. I'm not sure if I mentioned that in the last Round the World, how long it's been. So the lights now, I no longer have a fixture across the front like I used to. The only fixture across the middle of the tank is one of those LED shop lights that I got at the Wally World for $38, I want to say it was. And then at the far end of either tank, I have just one of those little cheap aluminum dome lights that has a compact fluorescent in it. And that's pretty much it as far as lighting this whole tank now. So this whole tank's lit by probably a little more than 100 watts total. 120 watts maybe total. So I'm impressed. I like it. Moving on. Snail Tank is doing really well now that I finally cleaned it out. I got all the planaria that was in there out, and it has not come back, and you can see speckles and dots everywhere. Those are eggs and babies and snails and just all kinds of stuff going on in there. I've got 2 broken pieces. That's all just one cuttle bone. If you see that big bright white piece there to the right, and then in the far back left corner, that's just one cuttle bone, but it's broken into 2 pieces. But that's adding lots of calcium for the snails in this tank, which is actually what started it all. I've been keeping calcium in this tank for a long time, and it just never occurred to me that the crustaceans like my crayfish and the snails in my other tank would need the calcium too. So that's where I've sort of begun trying to get all the tanks a little more situated with some calcium in them. So my purple spotted Gudgeon Tank here looks a little different. I did a big water change today. For the last several videos we've been looking at this tank. It's had the air stone in there. I've been treating it with the ChemiClean, which basically just treats for everything and just cleans your tank up really nicely. I love that stuff. So I finished up the treatment today, did a big water change, got all the funky water out. I vacked up a bunch of debris and stuff off the bottom. The temple plant over here was doing that weird thing where like the stems weren't connected to the ground anymore. It was just kind of hanging on by roots. So I sort of spread all of the trunks, if you will, around, and I kind of tucked them back into the sand to create more of a bushy effect and to actually pull them down away from the top. They were all the way up near the surface of the water, and I didn't actually get in there and cut anything. I just tucked everything down into the sand to sort of lower the tops of the plant. and I've got a lot of that stuff that was on there off. If you've been following along with my videos, you remember all that black gunky nasty stuff that was on those tempo plants. So now I've got a nice beautiful canopy again. I've got some nice red color coming out in there. And then I also took this Java fern that you can see sort of oddly stuffed under that rock back there. That was up in the front corner. It was kind of blocking the view into the tank. So that got moved back there. Not sure what this little plant right here is, but that's been hanging on. And that's still in there too. Again, not sure what it is, but it's in there. And then all of this Java fern. There's not a lot I can do to trim it back other than give it a haircut. And, you know, who wants to see, you know, Java fern just cut off at the top? It just looks stupid. So the only thing I can really do is break a rhizome in half, you know, and then that would just mean we break it here and remove this chunk, but we'd still have these huge pieces here, and so on and so forth. There's really not much I can do to thin that out and have it look nice and natural at this point. I'm perfectly okay with having it big and bushy as long as we can see in there and we can see the fish. Most of the fish are reclusive enough. The one that's not is my focal fish in the tank. The namesake is the purple spotted gudgeon right there. We'll ever focus clearly. And she doesn't exactly hide, so it's not like having the tank all, you know, thick and bushy is really preventing me from seeing my fish in there. So I like it. I'm going to leave it. And then we're going to move on to my 125 here. I just finished up water change on this tank. It was the last one I did. I never did put the cover back over the top. At least not properly. So we'll step back here a little bit. This one's always the hardest one to get the whole tank into the video because of where I have to stand. So there's my 125. Did water change about a week ago, about a 50%, and then I did another 50% today because this tank's really heavily stocked. And even if I do a 50% water change every week, I still have loads of nitrates in this tank. I really do need to stay on top of doing more water changes on this tank. So I wiped the glass down, did the water change. I removed a bunch of floating water sprite babies, and I've got a bucket full of them. I've got hundreds of little babies all the way up to good medium-sized plants. So if you are interested, remember, go down in the description below, and then you can hit me up on the email and talk to me about some plants. Otherwise, the only other thing I've done with this tank was add some of those mineral stones, but I added them directly to the filter, not the tank. And I've been monitoring the pH and the water hardness, and again, nothing's changing, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm not worried about shifting my pH or my water hardness or making anything that's going to be too radical of a shift from my fish. Because remember, the only reason I'm really doing this is because I've got some snails and crayfish that I want to be a little more healthy. I haven't been having issues with my fish, you know, I haven't had problems in my tank necessarily, and that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I have crayfish and snails that I want to do well, and as I've read more into it, I think it'll probably be beneficial to add some minerals to my tank. I have so little that it could probably use some, and again, I will be shooting some video talking about that coming up in the near future, so make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss that. I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet. So the only other thing I can say about this tank is that I'm trying to spread the water sprite around, the floating water sprite. I used to keep it tucked in underneath of the piece of wood right here that the Tenopoma is trying to tuck himself up under. But when I had the tilapia in here, it just destroyed the water sprite, and so I wound up putting some Java fern under there, and now it's like rooted to it and it's growing onto it, and I really like the way it looks. It's kind of cool. So I don't want to move it and put the water sprite back in there. And so what I'm left with is big chunks of floating water sprite. One of them drifts all the way down to this end. I really thinned this one out. But it sits right under the light, so not only does it grow like mad, but it just blocks all the light from this end of the tank, and this is the end where I feed everybody, so it's, you know, it just gets in my way. I wound up separating it out of the two main chunks that I left in the tank. I put the other one down at this end, and part of the spray bar angles upwards, and I'm hoping that sort of disturbance in the water will create a sort of physical barrier that keeps it sort of pushed down at this end. And if that's the case, maybe we'll get all of it going on down at this end, and even though it will still do the same thing underneath of this light eventually, at least it won't sit right where I feed everybody, because the current in this tank goes, well, if we were looking straight down, it would go clockwise. It goes across the back and then around this way, and then across the front it's going this way, and that's why you can see those roots are all moving in that direction, and this whole piece of plant's not drifting further down that end. It's trying to come this way, but that disturbance from my spray bar is actually sort of preventing it from drifting down to this end of the tank. So we'll see how all that pans out. You can tell everybody's waiting for dinner tonight. I haven't fed everybody yet. The tank that I am now calling my angelfish tank, and I will put this, you know, the playlist, I'll just continue on my angelfish tank playlist, which was what now is my T-bar tank, but it goes way back, and it used to have bunches and bunches of angelfish in it, so if you go back far enough on that playlist, you'll find videos from that tank from long ago. Nothing really to talk about in this tank. I do have a couple of the rubber lips. I think I've got a clown pleco in here and a rubber lip, and they're doing okay. I've got one little Endler's guppy, a couple of cherry barbs, and the two angelfish, and that's kind of it in this tank. So the plecos are keeping the tank looking nice and clean. For those of you who remember, I put some Anubias in here, and I just tied some rhizomes to the piece of wood. The one rhizome rotted away completely. The other one is half rotten, but the top section is still green and alive, and if you see that little tiny thing on the sort of front there, that little round looking thing is a little tiny leaf, believe it or not. So we'll see. Maybe we'll end up 5 years down the road with another tiny little dwarf Anubias growing in this tank, although I doubt it. It's either probably going to start growing and take, or it's not. This tank doesn't have any kind of mineral additives or anything, so we will wait and see. I might do a little bit on that, but we're going to move on because we're running long here and I've still got plenty to go. My quarantine tank is a mess right now. The water looks really dark because I've been putting so much of the Ick-A-Tack in there. I brought some hatchet fish home from the big chain pet store, and I should have waited till the fish that were in here were done and out, because what I did was I put the hatchet fish in there, and then a week later the hatchet fish just exploded with white spots all over them. I mean, they were covered. And so now I've been treating the tank, and as heavily as I've been treating it, both hatchet fish eventually died, and now I'm just going to run the course of this treatment, which is why this tank and this tank alone is the only one that did not get a water change. Although technically my Red Clawed Crab tank didn't get a water change, but I did top it off with a gallon of fresh RO water, so we'll kind of count that. This tank has had nothing done to it other than fishing dead hatchet fish out of it over the last couple of days. So moving on, we got Butterbean's tank here. He got a big water change this week. I normally do 5 gallons at a time. I've got a 5-gallon bucket that I use as my as my reservoir. And I've actually just saved a second bucket, and now I made up 10 gallons of water, because I used to have him in a 20-gallon tank, and a 5-gallon water change every time I did a water change was, 25% every water change was pretty good. But now he's in a 40-gallon tank, and it's not the same. So from time to time I want to do a little more than the regular old 5-gallon bucket, and we did. Yesterday I did 2 of the 5-gallon buckets, and the water's a lot brighter and clearer. I got a lot of the tannins out of the tank. Not really sure whether I moved the salinity. I never really worry too much about that, just by the nature of the way these euryhaline fish are. you know, if they get bounced around a little bit, it doesn't, they don't bat an eyelash at it. And not only because they don't have eyelashes, as has been pointed out to me before, but whether they had eyelashes or not, they wouldn't bat them, even if they did, because that's what euryhaline means, wide range of salinity, you know. So if I've changed it from 1.005 and, you know, now it's 1.006 or 7 or 3, you know, they don't care. It's not going to bother these fish at all. I do try to keep it a little lower than I used to, because I find if I get up over like 1.008 on the specific gravity, the plants really start struggling. Even this Java fern, which always seems to do pretty well in brackish water. So otherwise, everybody's still looking good. I put a bunch of shrimp that were with berry in there, and I've not seen many of them since. I did see one shrimp yesterday, and that's it. So don't know if eventually Butterbean's gotten around to working his way through them or what. But there you go. I'm not crazy about the light I've put on this tank either. I don't know if you can tell or not, but it looks really sort of strange and blue. I've got an LED on it, and it is an LED that's meant for plants. If you see the reflection through there, I don't want to take the glare out, it would be too bright. But you can see how it's got the red and blue LEDs, which are for the plant growth specifically. I will be doing a video also about that here coming up pretty soon, so you want to make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss that. I will be talking about some aquarium lighting in the very near future and how it relates to plant growth and algal growth and all that kind of stuff. So again, make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss that. But we'll go more into detail about that. But the long and short of it for this tank, for this video, is I'm not really sure. I just like the way it visually looks, you know. So I don't know. We'll see. We will finally get to my Red Clawed Crab tank. I usually keep this out when I'm shooting video because it just makes so much glare on the other tanks that I'm shooting, and so seldom do we actually get to see a crab out that it hardly even matters. But I think at the moment we might get to see two of them. If we look right there, you can kind of see the face of the female sticking out from behind that light rock, that sort of notched section in the front of that rock. And then I believe we've got the male sitting out right here. There he is. He was sitting out there yesterday. I got a little bit of video of him, or maybe the day before. They all seem to run together for me, so not really sure. The tank really needs a good wipe down. You can see how much salt's beginning to accumulate on the glass. The crabs really do seem to like the, what do you call that stuff? Water Sprite that I put in the tank. Whenever I'm pulling Water Sprite out of any of my tanks, if it's got like that really dark green stuff that I think is cyanobacteria growing on it, and it's visually there, I just throw it in this tank, and these crabs eat it up, and they love the Water Sprite. It goes away very quickly once it goes in here. And as I said, I also topped off the water. I added about a gallon of RO water, and other than that, not really a lot going on with this tank. As I've sort of said before, it's just kind of sitting here. Sort of more seems to be in my way than anything, so we'll see what happens to this one in the long run. But there we are, almost half an hour. Told you this was going to be a busy one. Did a lot in the fish room this week. And we are now back to my 29 miscellaneous where we started. So thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss anything I got coming up. You never know what it's going to be. And then, of course, don't forget this one here is my 29-gallon miscellaneous. So thanks again, and I will see you real soon on the next one.